Everyone talks about a healthy diet, but what is a diet? A diet can simply be the sum of calories and nutrients, but we can also mean foods or even dietary patterns. It's good to keep that in mind when talking about diets. Dietary guidelines are very important for the prevention of non-communicable diseases, such as cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes and lifestyle-related cancers. We know from epidemiological studies that foods are more strongly related to these diseases than individual nutrients. That's why we have food-based dietary guidelines. For communication to the public, it's also easier to talk about foods than single nutrients. Let me explain to you how dietary guidelines are made. Prospective cohort studies form an important basis. In these studies, a large group of individuals, called a cohort, gives information about their habitual diet, often by means of questionnaires. The cohort is then followed for many years to monitor who develops disease or who dies. In a cohort, you can define groups of people with different intakes of foods or nutrients. For example, you can divide the cohort into those who drink alcohol and those who don't drink alcohol. When you follow both groups over time, you can monitor the number of adverse events. In our example, you can compare the risk of stroke in alcohol drinkers with that of non-drinkers. Dividing these two risks provides you with a measure called relative risk. Cohort studies are observational in nature. We just watch what happens over time without actively changing people's habits. But we face a problem here. People with unhealthy diets also make other unhealthy choices. This can be misleading. For example, if you find a higher risk of stroke in alcohol drinkers, that may also be caused by the fact that they smoke more. This phenomenon is called confounding. When studying alcohol in relation to stroke, smoking is the confounder. It is associated with alcohol, and smoking also increases the risk of stroke. So smoking blurs the association between alcohol and stroke. Cohort data must be carefully adjusted for confounding to obtain a valid relative risk. We have statistical techniques for that, but it's not an easy thing to do. There will always be some residual confounding. Although cohort studies are invaluable for making dietary guidelines, you can never be 100% sure that you are looking at causal effects. Cohort studies only provide you with associations, because you can never completely rule out sources of bias, which includes confounding. A study design that can show causal effects is the randomized controlled trial. In a trial, you can test dietary interventions. For example, you may randomly assign people to drinking coffee or no coffee for 3 months and monitor blood pressure changes over that period. At the end of the study, you can compare blood pressure values between coffee and non-coffee drinkers. The good thing is that there is no confounding because of randomization. For example, smokers and alcohol users will be equally distributed by chance over the groups of coffee and non-coffee drinkers. And when you see a difference in blood pressure between the intervention and control group, you can be quite confident that it's caused by coffee. At least as long as you make sure that the people in your trial stick to your intervention and don't start changing other behaviors during the study. But trials also have limitations. People don't want to adhere to an intervention for a long time. They prefer making dietary and lifestyle choices themselves. Therefore, most trials focus on short-term changes in risk factors or intermediate endpoints, rather than disease endpoints that require many years of follow-up. Committees of scientific experts look at evidence from prospective cohort studies on habitual diets and disease endpoints. And they also look at evidence from randomized trials on dietary interventions and risk factors. They integrate the evidence from these different types of short-term and long-term studies. Sometimes the overall picture is clear and consistent, but more often the scientific literature is not that straightforward. Now you know how dietary guidelines are made, but what are the actual dietary guidelines? I will give them to you in a nutshell. For the prevention of non-communicable diseases, it's important to maintain energy balance. So avoid excess calories and have sufficient exercise. Also, cut down on meat, especially red and processed meat, and try to adopt a more plant-based diet that's rich in fiber and low in saturated fat. Replace refined grains with whole grains and eat your fruits and veggies. Legumes and a handful of nuts are also healthy choices. Intake of about 2 portions of dairy per day, for example milk and yogurt, and fish at least once a week are also good choices. Avoid added salt and added sugars. And it's a good idea to drink filtered coffee, tea and water, but limit the intake of sugar-sweetened beverages and alcohol. Well guys, I gave you a lot to chew on. This is it for now. Take your time to digest all this information.